The day that Telltale Games closed its doors, leaving 400 people without a job, Noclip was inundated with requests for a documentary on the studio. Telltale Games meant a lot to a lot of people, and it seemed like fans of the games wanted to celebrate the studio's legacy. But the circumstances surrounding the sudden closure of the studio made this difficult. It seemed cruel to put together a documentary celebrating the history of the games when so many of the people who had made those games were still trying to piece their lives back together. To be completely honest, I really wasn't sure if it was something we should touch at all, but I also wanted to offer Noclip's resources to anybody who felt that a story should be told. So I reached out to an old friend. Scott Butterworth worked in PR for Telltale right up until its final day, but before he joined the studio we had sat a few desks away from each other at my old job, GameSpot. With Scott's help we reached out to a number of ex-Telltale employees. I learned more about what it was like to work at the studio, the parts they'd like to remember, and the parts they'd rather forget. You see, for most Telltale alumni, their feelings on the studio are complicated. Many made lifelong friends there, found the work rewarding and the day-to-day exciting, but it was also a place which suffered terrible crunch for years, toxic management, difficult work conditions, and ultimately abandoned hundreds of people into one of the most expensive places to live in America with no severance and only 2 weeks of health insurance. Understandably, many of the folks who work there have found it difficult to summarize their own feelings on Telltale, so most of them turned us down, thinking that they probably had a lot to lose and really nothing to gain. Hundreds of people worked at Telltale over the course of its 14-year life. Each of those people had a different experience and a valuable story to tell. So our story isn't a comprehensive history of the studio or its games. It's the story of 4 people who wanted to come forward and tell their version of the tale. Through their stories, we hope to give you an honest insight into what it was like to work at Telltale, the studio culture, the crunch, the creative victories, and how the sudden closure affected so many of them so deeply.
The first game I ever worked on was episode 2 of the Back to the Future series. I did a super tiny little test scene where Marty talks to Doc in a hotel room, and nobody moves, and it was still very hard. When I started, I think the studio was maybe 80 people at maximum. It felt really small and scrappy. Like it was before Walking Dead had hit, right? So we were still making like equivalent, basically fancy point-and-click adventure games. But even then we were taking like all the game out of them, and they were like basically just these movies, and they were really only for like this weird hardcore group of people who really like point-and-click adventure games, which really was always more popular in like Europe and stuff. But it was cool. It felt like it did kind of feel like anything could happen, and because the pressure was so low, because these games were so tiny and weird, it felt like we were just gonna make almost anything. Then I worked on our Jurassic Park game. The Jurassic Park game is probably the most catastrophic game that Telltale ever made. It almost destroyed the studio, I'm pretty sure. It was a nightmare for a whole bunch of different reasons. It had all these gameplay innovations. It was like kind of choice-based and a lot of quick time events and that kind of stuff. Really a bunch of things we learned from that helped make Walking Dead good, but it was definitely a bad game at the time. And it was supposed to come out episodically, but for some reason we had to release it all in one big chunk.
Telltale was a company that told stories with other people's intellectual properties, but these games were as varied as the source materials they pulled from. They created games based on comic books, cartoons, crime serials, popular films, and even seemingly abandoned video game franchises. But while several of these games were based on household names, their breakthrough hit would come from a Robert Kirkman comic book that AMC were turning into a TV show. After the zombie apocalypse, things at Telltale changed.
I mean, The Walking Dead was for my personal experience, it was more similar to Back to the Future, because it's like 3D environments and 3D characters and sets. And the bar of quality for how good the cutscenes had to be kept getting higher and higher, and like the voice acting and everything kept getting better and more interesting. And I think even at the time we could tell that the story and the game was pretty good. Because it was episodic, the first episode came out and the world freaked out, which no one had done ever, basically, right? I thought the studio was gonna die, because Jurassic Park had just come out and everything had gone so miserably that I thought the studio was doomed. And then episode 1 of Walking Dead came out and suddenly everyone's talking about that, and so it's crazy. And we didn't even I don't think people on the team even, it's hard to tell. I guess Sean and Jake, who are the creators, probably knew how it ended at the time, but we didn't know working on it. But it felt like everyone believed in it and it was nice and small and cohesive, One of my favorite memories actually ever of the working on the season is that for episode 3, we had the script, and they decided to make sure the team all knew what was going on. There'd be a big script reading where everyone would get together and we would actually act out parts of the script. And we actually did it in a park in Marin. We went outside, we ordered burritos from this place that we always get burritos from, and we all sat in a park and just read the script in a circle. And it was just super nice, and we were like, oh, this episode's like really good. And we kind of all gave some feedback on it and stuff, and like it felt like the whole studio cared and was all working toward kind of one vision at the time, which is not how it always felt in later years, but at the time it felt really special and cool. Telltale changed dramatically after The Walking Dead came out. It was pretty weird experientially. The entire studio was working on Walking Dead at the same time. That's all everybody was working on. And they had made so much money that then we moved to the new office. We moved to the new bigger building and the studio started expanding and expanding and they were hiring more and more and more. And clearly their plan from the higher ups was to make 3 Walking Deads at the same time. That was always their dream, right? They're gonna be like, that made so much money, we're just gonna keep doing that. And the original creators, Sean and Jake, left around sometime early in season 2. And Bruner was just like, just make the same game over and over and over again, basically, which turned out to be bad in the long run.
Ready when you are.
Cool. Before we start, first of all, can you tell us your name and where you used to work?
My name is Emily Grace Buck, and I used to be a narrative designer at Telltale. I was hired at the beginning of June 2015, so a couple years.
All right. What was your first project you worked on?
I was on The Walking Dead Michonne.
Okay.
They started me on that day 1.
So had you moved to California to work for Telltale?
I did. It was a bit crazy. They hired me, and I had to be out there about 2 weeks after they gave me the offer.
Right.
And at the time, I was preparing to get married, so I came out, started working at Telltale, flew back to the East Coast, got married again, flew back, kept working. Right. The marriage didn't work out, but the Telltale job did. I was hired in the middle of their big hiring push when they were trying to grow from around 200-something employees to 400-something employees. I think when I started, there were 18 people in the design department, and those designers were working on a lot of different projects. Tales from the Borderlands was still running at that point. A lot of people were working on the first season of Minecraft. Some people were on Walking Dead Michonne. Batman was a glimmer in people's eye at that point. Some people were starting to talk about it, but it wasn't fully in development. And same thing with Walking Dead Season 3, A New Frontier at that point. We had a very, very strong family atmosphere at Telltale. I made incredibly close friends who are still some of the dearest people in my life. We would go out for drinks or dinner together almost every evening. Honestly, people went out to lunch in groups, hung out together on the weekends. My favorite anecdote about this that I love sharing is when I got divorced, 12 of my coworkers showed up to help me pack my apartment. That's not normal. We loved each other and we kind of all went through the fire together, and I appreciate those people so much.
Everybody at Telltale was so nice. I mean, I made lifelong friends there. The entire marketing team was super great. I made fast friends with our video editors. I mean, it was a huge company of nearly 400 people. So I'd imagine even if you have a hard time making friends, it's easy to find someone in that group of 400 that you can kind of connect with. Everybody was super, super close. And there are people that I worked with at Telltale that I consider my brother and my sister, very, very close. When you work in a place that's pretty stressful, you bond pretty quick.
In general, people got along. I would say that at certain points there was definitely a fear of some of the upper management because of shifts and that type of thing, but that was limited to a very small number of people.
Time and time again I heard about this community feel at Telltale Games. Initially it seemed to contradict what I'd heard about the working conditions there, that the studio had a horrible production pipeline that forced terrible crunch on the staff and left employees exhausted and creatively frustrated. The emerging picture was that the two were probably connected, that perhaps the conditions caused employees, many of whom had moved to the region to work at Telltale, to seek support with the closest friends they had, their colleagues. This new Telltale was a lot different to the plucky studio of about 100 developers that had shipped The Walking Dead. The company had ballooned to 3 times its size and was collaborating with a half dozen external partners on new game series, using The Walking Dead as a template. The trenches at Telltale were led by creative triangles. Each project had a lead writer, lead designer, and lead director. but a perpetual problem for these leads was the negative creative influence of executives. The leadership style of CEO Kevin Brunner has been widely reported since the closure of the studio, and it consistently came up in our conversations with ex-employees too. Reporting by Megan Faroukmanesh highlighted that one of the reasons the first season of The Walking Dead had been such a success is that the leads on the project, Jake Rodkin and Sean Vanneman, had a minimum interference from executives due to the rush to get the project out the door and their ability to push back on that influence. Vanneman and Rodkin would leave during work on The Walking Dead Season 2 to found Campo Santo, and suddenly there was nobody left to counter the execs. When the folks we talked to on camera spoke about the executive team, more often than not, I felt like they were referring to Brunner specifically. The collaborative tension between he and the leads caused shockwaves throughout the company that affected practically every employee in one way or another.
When I first started at Telltale, there was not a whole lot of pre-production. They would run a writer's room, a lot like TV shows do, to help try and plan out the season. And then each episode kind of worked on a 6-month cadence, approximately, but it depended on the project. There were some episodes that got done in a way shorter time frame than 6 months, and then other ones would have multiple revs and take almost a full year. It just kind of depended on what was going on in the studio at the time, what kind of changes were being asked for, who was on the project, whether the project leadership switched or switched multiple times, because that was sometimes something that happened.
The review process where you had to show the game to the executive staff was the worst. That's when the episodes would blow up, and you would anticipate them blowing up, because often they would blow up in specific ways. The only thing that would be considered good, you knew what it was going to be. So we essentially kept just kind of making the same game over and over again, because we knew it would just in specific would please the executives, and sometimes some of the head marketing people were in there as well. The biggest problem with Telltale was you couldn't do what you thought was good, you had to do what you thought the executives would think is good. And that was like an overarching like vice grip on the entire creative thing at the studio. I think the source of most of its problems.
So what was the stuff that the executive team liked, and what was the stuff they didn't like?
I think due to the very nature of the review process, which is everyone sits in the room and watches the episode like a movie, pacing was always a big thing. And basically like the lead executive like very much was interested in like, does the plot make sense, and does the mechanics of the story and the interactive stuff make sense, and didn't really care about, are these characters likable? Like, do the character beats were like always cut. Fans often notice like season 1 of The Walking Dead had a whole bunch of scenes where you could just dick around and talk to people and just like learn about them, and it's not even about the plot, right? Like, and trying to create scenes like that because of the nature of the review process, where it, like, honestly, if it just played like a well-paced movie, it probably was going to get through. But if it played like there was a really long sequence where the character walked around and like looked at a ton of stuff and talked to a bunch of people, that probably was going to not play well in a room, especially early on. Like when that stuff's unfinished, it's honestly kind of painful if you have to sit there and watch somebody play it for like 30 minutes. But if you're playing it yourself, it probably is good, and you probably could let the time to make it good happen. But instead, stuff like that would be seen. Another thing is the executive staff had difficulty envisioning what something would look like when it was done. And I honestly, when I was a director in those meetings, I feel like the majority of my job was going like, this is what it will look like when it's done. Or like when they had a concern, being like, okay, we're going to do this about that, and like constantly jumping on these grenades. And so like stuff that was half formed that could have been cool, or stuff that seemed like it was paced badly, but you know, made the characters more well-rounded, that stuff just got cut. It just got cut and cut. And the marketing people just wanted to see something exciting, and they had big voices in the room. I think everything just got faster and more compressed.
When I first did my first playable, where I was like playing the character, that was for Guardians of the Galaxy, and the only reason they like gave me the controller was because my boss was out that day. So they were like, oh, I guess Caroline can play, and I was like, I get to play this game early. This is so exciting. In a room full of people, they're all going to judge my decisions. This is going to be great. I'm going to pick all the bad ones. I was piloting, and an executive at the time, you know, we took a break to give feedback, and he was saying something like, oh, you know, I think the player is going to feel this during this part. And everyone was kind of like, like taking notes very seriously. And I was like, well, I was playing and I didn't think that. And I felt like every head in the room kind of like turn on a swivel, and they were like, what has she done?
There were 3 projects going on at the same time. A lot of internal work was being done, so there's lots of reasons behind why we'd done everything that way. And the guy, you know, the executive staff would pop in for like, you know, they'd see it once, and they'd go like, oh, fucking do all this. They would just throw out an idea, and it's like, well, you don't know we tried that idea a week ago. And like it was like still they had to have power and influence over the thing, but not actual like investment in the trenches of the thing. And so that it's really like this really high level, don't understand exactly what all the guts of the project mean.
It did become a little frenetic at times, for sure, especially if you were thrown onto a project kind of in the middle of it. There wasn't a lot of space for onboarding because everybody was just trying to fix things so quickly and iterate that there was not a lot of ramp up for people. And Telltale, especially at that time, really prided itself on the ability to iterate, the ability to take really large change sets and apply them quickly, which is extremely difficult and caused a lot of crunch. It caused a lot of overtime hours. That's another thing that got progressively substantially better at Telltale the longer I worked there. I started out on especially Walking Dead Michonne, working a lot of 70, 80, even occasionally 90-hour weeks, trying to get that game out the door. And by the time I was on Walking Dead, the final season, that was rarely happening for me. I was actually able to work close to 40-hour work weeks a lot of the time.
Right. The way you make it sounds like a blessing.
Yeah, I mean, 40 hours seems amazingly relaxing when you're used to being in the office every single day during the weekend and also till 11 p.m.
Eventually, Telltale co-founder Kevin Bruner was asked to step down by the board and was replaced for a time by fellow co-founder Dan Connors. Connors would stay in the job for a number of months before replacing himself with Pete Hawley. Former employee Paul Mastriani was hired as an executive assistant at the beginning of this shuffle and worked for all three men.
So I was the executive assistant at Telltale Games. I was hired in to assist Kevin Bruner, and I did that for about 3 days.
Okay.
And he left the company, and so I started working with Dan, and that was great. He's really just a genuine human being, very nice, you know, very generous with his time. But Dan also was not doing what he wanted to be doing. Like, he didn't want to be CEO again. Most of that period of time, about 5 months, was him looking for a replacement. And at that point, we found Pete Hawley.
So what was the feeling in the studio when the executive swap happened?
Creatively, very exciting, because I think there was going to be less pushback to good ideas on stuff. Stability-wise, very frightening. You know, new CEO is from Zynga. Zynga's famous for big layoffs. And so a lot of the stuff the new CEO said about basically staying out of creative's way was very refreshing. And honestly, some of that stuff turned out really well. Like toward the end, when like some of the bigger creative roadblocks in terms of executives and marketing people were gone, we were starting to make some of our best stuff, I think, actually toward the end of Telltale being operating. But obviously, stability of the company's finances was not something that worked out.
There was an interim period as well, wasn't there, between those two executives where...
Yes, where Dan was temporarily CEO.
Yeah. Did that feel like it was getting it back on track as well?
It was coming back on. It was almost weird to see the studio and the creative people almost like get out of like a Stockholm syndrome.
Right.
Like it's like, you know, they had been making something in a specific way to please a specific person for so long, and it was actually like hard. It was almost like you got out of like an abusive relationship. It was like even hard to understand that like this is not going to get swatted down in the room. Like it won't. It would have in the old days, but now the swatter is gone.
Pete had come out of Zynga. He came to Telltale, and his basic mission was, you know, we've got to slim down. We've got to make fewer games, we've got to make better games, and we've got to innovate, which is what people have been saying at the company for years. One of the first things that happened, unfortunately, was the layoffs back in November of 2017.
In November of 2017, Telltale ran out of runway. Hawley, no stranger to mass layoffs, let go of around 90 people, or 25% of the company. And even to those who knew there were problems, it still came as a shock.
It felt fairly out of the blue. We knew we were making too many projects, and I think that's kind of an important thing to discuss at Telltale. We knew people were used to our formula. We wanted to change that. We wanted to iterate. We wanted to grow. But I think some of the desire to actually make that happen and push towards it came, unfortunately, a little late. Once again, that's just my take. But yeah.
Lots of my close friends, I mean, some of the people who were responsible for getting me into Telltale, just gone. And, you know, of course there's all sorts of survivor's guilt. Like, well, why are we still here? Like, you know, all these talented people are just out of jobs, and that was really hard for us to cope with. And of course, shortly thereafter, we start hemorrhaging talent too, because people feel like they see the writing on the wall.
It was really rough. It was a rough day. It was really emotional. Like, I definitely cried a bit. Like, it was hard to see some people go away. And it was terrifying too. It's like, even if you survive, you're like, oh fuck, that just happened and I'm still here. Like, time to update my LinkedIn.
It was, at the time, my worst day working at Telltale. I had friends who were affected, and seeing friends cry because, they love the job, they love the people they work with, they moved across the country to work there, they've given up something, they've done a sacrifice so that their family can move and work at Telltale. That's difficult. All of us were just like, fuck it, fuck this day. Like, we're obviously not working anymore for the rest of the day. Like, let's go to this pub in downtown San Rafael that we like all love and normally go to like karaoke Fridays at, and like just chill and drink and buy drinks for our friends that were just laid off, and like fuck everybody.
Did it feel like there was more stability after that? Did it feel like, okay, we've lost a bit of headcount, we got more runway?
Honestly, yes, which I now realize in retrospect, some of the things that were sold to us were not 100% true, were not being represented in a way that actually made them truthful. Everything that we thought after that point was like, okay, that was done to save the studio, right? The reason that big layoff happened was because the studio would never have survived otherwise. After we recovered from the initial shock of the first round of layoffs, then actually I think that was probably a golden era of Telltale creative work, actually. Like, we were even more unburdened. There was even another level of sort of executive muckety-muck that was gone after that point, and we were just truly unfettered to basically do whatever we thought was best. And I think we did, and that was happening during the finale of Batman Season 2, and some stuff we got away with in that episode I think we never would have been able to do, even with some of the people that left right in the first round of layoffs.
For me, the thing I'm most proud of is absolutely Batman. Both seasons of Batman, the Telltale series. I worked on 8 out of 10 episodes of that game. It's extremely near and dear to my heart. I personally designed the romance content with Catwoman, which I love, and Telltale hadn't done anything quite like that before. I love romance in games and sex in games, so being able to put that out there was really important for me. And then it was well received, so that was super exciting too. I worked exclusively on licensed IP at Telltale, and when it came to Batman, that was easy because I've always been a big Batman fan. I've watched pretty much all of the TV shows, read a ton of the comics, familiar with the movies. I could just go to my own prior knowledge. For Walking Dead, I was not super familiar before I started working there, and a lot of my first few weeks was me watching the TV show on my lunch break, reading all of the back issues of the comics, getting myself up to speed on how that worked, because
It's a lot of back issues.
It's a lot of back issues. That's a lot of comics. It's pretty long. It's been on for a while. I love working with other people's characters and finding ways to show off their world and help the values of their world building shine and let people explore within that place. And all of the IP holders that we worked with allowed for enough degree of flexibility and enough creativity that we were able to do some really cool stuff. But I'm one of those writers who came up writing a lot of fan fiction. So for me, it felt like I was getting paid to do what I had been doing as a hobby for like a decade, which is rad.
Things seemed to be looking up for Telltale. The terrible crunch and executive influence that had plagued previous years was now gone, and the team was free to work on new technology, sign new deals, and bring back fan favourites. Perhaps it wasn't so much that Hawley didn't feel the need to get in the way of creatives at the studio, and more the fact that Telltale's clock was ticking even closer to midnight. The studio was still running out of money, and quickly.
Pete's job when he first came in was, I need to find funding to keep this company afloat. Telltale hadn't been profitable in years. We'd get the financial reports and we'd see like, these IPs are not selling, people are not buying our games, they're tired of the same kind of like, the formula that we'd been producing. And like, while the narratives were strong, the writing's strong, the design is there, like, it became a formula. And I think people started to recognize that. And internally, like, everybody wanted to break away from that. Obviously we had Stranger Things coming. We knew that we had a fan favorite in Wolf 2. And we were like, we're gonna do what people want to see, and hopefully they'll be groundbreaking and different enough for the studio that it reignites interest and gets consumer passion behind us again. There were like open world hubs. Like, that was not a Telltale thing. We had like follow cams. Like, what? it was like 2010 suddenly.
We also heard that like internally there was work being done on new tools, like
Yeah.
engine stuff.
Yeah, we'd switched graphics engines and we went over to Unity, and it was a lot more stable, and it afforded us the opportunities to try new things. We were starting to leave the Telltale tool behind, although it was still our preferred tool to actually write in.
Right.
Because it was just really great about branching and conditionals.
There was some optimism that what had to be done had been done, and we were going to now work on a new slate of different projects, managed differently with a new CEO. Things would change, the culture would get substantially better, and we were going to be okay in the long run. There were a lot of rumors swirling that there were going to be more rounds of layoffs, as there always are.
Pete's goal was, we need to secure funding. And he did that tirelessly until 2 days before the company closed. And I know this because I was booking all of those meetings. There were times where we thought, like, this looks good, we'd have company meetings where we'd report on the status of things. And we were really hoping, we were banking actually on Walking Dead being a hit. And it wasn't, you know? It did okay, but it certainly didn't reach the numbers of the first Walking Dead or Minecraft Season 1. We still felt like, you know, if we can just get over this next hurdle, if we can secure the next round of funding, that'll take us to Stranger Things. Stranger Things will take us to Wolf.
Once again, I can't speak for everyone, but there seemed to be a general sense of caution. Some of us were worried. I was a little concerned. And that's part of what made how it kind of collapsed overnight feel so strange.
The big problem is it was never going to be a 48-hour solution, right? Like, this was a year-long problem. Since Pete came in and tried to find funding, and never secured it, like, that was the issue. And the fact that we couldn't secure it 6 months ago, you know, 3 months ago, a month ago, like, leading up to those final days, it was just like, maybe we should have stopped laying track.
The day before, everything seemed fine. Actually, in the afternoon, we had a creative meeting where we were talking about the possible projects we'd be working on next. People seemed optimistic and kind of excited about it. It seemed like things were starting to fall into place. And that morning, I came in, it was like any other morning. I admit I showed up a little late that day. And people already seemed a little nervous by the time I walked into the office because we had all gotten the email that there was going to be a sudden all-hands meeting, but especially in the creative department, since we had just had the meeting the other day, the initial thought was, oh, they're going to tell us what we're going to work on next. That makes sense. Then the rumors started swirling and you started seeing some people looking somber, and then the assumption was there's going to be another round of layoffs. I don't know how many people were prepared or knew that it was a full closure until Pete said it in that meeting.
Did you know the writing was on the wall before everyone else did?
I did.
All right.
Yeah.
That must carry its own guilt.
Yeah, I had about 48 hours of, I didn't go to work the day before.
Right.
I stayed home, called in sick, and I couldn't face anybody. I was crying, I was depressed, like, it was heartbreaking. And then to go in Friday morning when I knew it was coming, I went over and I told a couple of, like, very close select people, I said, hey, this is what's happening. If you have stuff on your laptop you want, get it now.
I had another friend like pull me aside later who like knew what was happening, had known for about a day, I think. And he was like, we're closing. We were in a room by ourselves and I just started crying. And I feel like that was probably the moment where, because we were towards the Wolf team and they probably all saw that happening and were like, well, pack up our bags, start saving things. But, you know, while I was having my own experience, that sort of rumor was kind of spreading around the office on its own too.
It was heartbreaking walking around the office and seeing people having their daily stand-up meetings, having conversations about, you know, arguments about like, oh, we should try this. No, it's gotta be this way. You know, these futile engagements that, you know, you wanna just walk over and say, guys, let's just take a minute, but that wasn't really my place to do that.
I was actually in the middle of a voice recording session when it happened. I was recording Clementine for her final scene in the final season, the first round of recording. And so it was an utterly surreal moment where we were recording a scene that was like all about like closure and stuff and like coming to the end of a journey. And then they were like, there's a meeting suddenly at noon, everyone has to go. And like I deliberately didn't tell Melissa, who plays Clementine, it was happening because I wanted to get the audio just in case. I didn't know what the fuck was going to happen. It's like, we've got to get the audio just in case we ever can use it.
Yeah, it was bizarre. I was standing kind of in the back of the room. I had showed up just as the meeting was starting. Pete had been walking around in front of the group, kind of cracking jokes. That was his normal way before a meeting. And then he sat down, and I don't remember the exact quote, but it was something along the lines of, "Our journey has come to an end." And then he told us the company was closing. There were audible gasps. People immediately started sobbing and hugging each other.
And I think the shock of it was so hard for some people to grasp that, like, when he said that we weren't getting severance, that our health insurance was running out 2 weeks later, like, nobody balked, because it was just like, wait, we don't come back to work? Like, that's it right now? The shock of that was just so much for some, and, you know, people started crying and holding each other, and it was, you know, like I said, we had that family, that family vibe, and we realized we weren't going to be seeing our family anymore. Like, that was it.
They initially said we only had 30 minutes to exit the building. They did not hold to that. There were definitely people who stayed until the end of the day, and then they let us in a few days later to come get all of our stuff too. So they were much more flexible about that, but the initial announcement was met with some fear and some sadness. Yeah.
Oh, anger then?
There really wasn't.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe. I didn't see any. It just seemed like sadness and disappointment and defeatism in a lot of ways. Like, I saw some people I'd worked with who were seniors at the company who had been there for more than 10 years, sitting at their desks with their head down crying, which I didn't know what to do about that.
I got pulled into an office shortly before all hands and was basically told, like, yes, this is happening. You know, you're our PR team. We're going to need you here helping for the day, and you're going to be employed for the next week. So I was not laid off that day. I had employment for another week. However, I had a vacation scheduled, you know, months in advance, and I was supposed to leave literally that day. I had my bags packed to go to New York, didn't even drive to work, was like taken to work by a friend, and was gonna like Uber to the airport after work and just like go to New York, go see my friends, go to a friend's wedding, and like all this started happening. And when they told me I had like a week left to work, I was like, well, yeah, I mean, I'm obviously gonna take the pay. I'm obviously going to work that week and take my benefits for another week or however long I have my benefits for, and I'll do the absolute minimum necessary to do that.
What were your thoughts and fears at that moment? Like, do you go, I'm going to miss these people? Do you go, how am I going to pay my rent? Like, where's your head at in those like early moments?
All of those places. I was very worried about my coworkers, especially some of them who I knew were in kind of dodgy financial situations. The Bay Area is expensive, and not everyone at Telltale was paid super well, and we didn't get any severance. I didn't know what was going to happen with them, especially for some of my coworkers who have kids. I didn't know where they were going to land or how. I knew I was going to miss everyone because we had such a family atmosphere, but I was mostly thinking about kind of those members of the community who I knew would be the most vulnerable and hard hit.
It was rough to be let go and not get a severance and find out 2 weeks later your health insurance is gone. My wife's in med school. She needs health insurance legally to go to school. And to find out like in 2 weeks, like we're all in trouble. Like,
a friend's boyfriend, a coworker's boyfriend, drive me to the airport, and I'm not a nervous flyer, but I got to that airport and I was like, I need to throw up. It's like, I'm sick. I am so anxious, it has just like wrecked my body. I'm hot, I'm sweating, I need to throw up. insanity. I don't even like really know how to describe it better.
As somebody who's had a panic attack in an airport, it sounds like you had your first panic attack.
Yes, I think that is exactly what happened. And I still have like anxiety like to this day. Yeah, it's just like, I just like developed it like that day. It was like, congratulations, your whole brain works differently now because of this traumatic experience.
Each individual that lost their job had their own personal mountain to climb. For some it was psychological, for others it involved pulling children out of school, changing careers, or moving city. Paul had left a promising career in film to be with his wife in Northern California where she attended school, and his application to Telltale was an attempt to break into video games writing. He had worked as an executive assistant at Telltale, waiting for his shot to contribute to the writing team. And when it did, it came at the cruelest of moments.
And they started giving me opportunities little by little while I was simultaneously still doing the executive assistant job, which was cool. Like, I was happy to hustle and grind to make it happen. But yeah, I was given a shot to work on Stranger Things, and I was doing a lot of side characters and people that you would meet in the hub world, and it was really exciting for me. I mean, like, working on an IP that was like really well known and working with writers who I really respected, who were giving me great feedback and helping me along, like, that was so thrilling. And the funny thing is, so on the Wednesday before we closed, or before the news hit that we were closing on that Friday, the head of the creative department told me that on Friday we were going to have a conversation about me leaving the executive assistant position behind fully. And I had just caught wind of what was going on, and I just couldn't believe the timing. It was just so, like, just unbelievable. I was crestfallen, man. Well, my wife is in med school here, so we have to be here. And for me, it was challenging too, because, you know, hindsight, wish I had known we were not going to have employment after September 21st, because in June, I had put a down payment on a house. We moved in July. I leased a new car September 1st. Like, got hit with quite a few things all at once. So I've got to be here, so I've just been trying to find whatever work I can.
It must be a frustrating professional position to be in, where your break was right there.
Yeah.
And then suddenly it's like hit reset almost.
Oh yeah, my break was 2 days away. Like, it was rough. And it's a shame too, because I thought all the work we had done on Stranger Things was really cool.
Everyone was helping each other. I mean, we had a couple of Facebook groups set up within like 15 or 20 minutes to help all of us keep in contact with one another and start passing out jobs. Just about everybody went to one of a few different bars that were general Telltale hangouts to commiserate and try to take care of one another. People were sending each other job notices. Actually, the people who had been laid off from Telltale the previous year, a lot of them started reaching out with job listings and stuff like that, trying to help, because they knew, at least on some level, what we were going through and what that felt like. Some people were starting to look for jobs, but then that's when things really kicked in. For example, some people had started fundraising accounts for people who were in really dire financial straits, and actually the largest number of those got started up about a week after, as people started to take stock of where their life actually was and what their prospects were for finding a new job or needing to move. That's when they realized, like, oh no, I need money, or in some cases, oh no, I need medicine. I have at least one former coworker who had to ask for extra money to buy asthma medication because he couldn't afford it after being laid off, and I'm actually not sure he's found a job yet.
Scott and I were on PR for a week and then we were done. The Minecraft team was like a week and then they were done. HR basically fulfilled their obligations to, you know, answer questions about what happened and all that stuff, and then they were done. And people were clearly tweeting at Telltale like, what the fuck are you doing? What the fuck are you doing? And it's like, you know, the people who did this aren't reading that. Like, I was reading that. Someone who was affected was like reading all of those tweets and everything, and it was just like, I mean, that like messes with your brain a little bit.
Kent had been with Telltale for the best part of a decade and had slowly risen up through the ranks from project to project. At the time of the closure, he was creative director on The Walking Dead's final season, a job he'd have the opportunity to see through. You see, once Telltale announced it was closing, the owners of The Walking Dead, Skybound Entertainment, rushed in to see what could be done to save the project. And so, a day after the closure, while visiting the office to pick up the last of his things, Kent got a phone call.
When I came back the next day, I actually got a call from Paul Mathis, who was the franchise owner of The Walking Dead, and the other executive producer, Brody Anderson. And they were like, hey, are you in the studio right now? Like, come to this room. And I went to a room, and they had a spreadsheet, and they had figured out a budget to save the game. And they said they were already talking, like Skybound had already contacted them, and that there was going to be a meeting with them like next week. And so like the week after that, I actually came back to have a meeting in Telltale in the old boardroom, and talk with a bunch of Skybound people, and they started talking about the actual feasibility of putting this thing back on, and Pete was there, and like the marketing people were there and stuff. And so it started happening right away, so the possibility that it would occur happened almost instantly after Telltale closed down. And then it was an excruciatingly long waiting game for about 2 months to understand, and we didn't know when, and it was all kinds of complicated negotiations Skybound was having with the people who now owned the rights to Telltale's corpse. The team that was working on finishing The Walking Dead the final season is exclusively ex-Telltale, entirely. It was about 45 people at peak, and we went back to work right in the old offices, because that was the only way we were going to get the game back up in time, and just to finish the last 2 episodes, basically. The third episode was like at its like midpoint in production, and the first round of recording for the last episode. So like there was a lot of stuff already done, and so they really actually only basically hired back everybody that they would need to finish it. So like pretty much all the writing was done, so they really only hired back 1 writer and like 1 designer and that kind of stuff. But like they hired back a huge amount of cinematographers, because that's like the bulk of a Telltale production, which was great because I knew all those people were having trouble finding work.
I don't personally have any bad things to say about that. It looks like it was handled quite brilliantly, and in a way that reached out to the developers, helped support them, and gave the fans and people who had bought the game what they were expecting. I played the 3rd episode after it came out from Skybound publishing it. It's good. It was a lot of the things that I had heard talked about that episode was going to be.
Was it strange playing the game?
Yeah. It was weird. I debated whether or not I wanted to for a while. I didn't until a few weeks after it came out. It wasn't quite as weird as, so I was the episode lead designer of episode 2 that dropped 3 days after we all got laid off. So that was really weird, watching the fan reactions to that, and the lack of press it received was also strange. Only a few outlets reviewed it.
Why do you think that was?
Because that wasn't the part of the Telltale story that was the most interesting thing at the time.
Coverage of Telltale's closure was all over the games press, but as the weeks wore on, the focus drifted away. So while the eyes of the gaming world went elsewhere, there were still hundreds of ex-Telltalers struggling to find work. Ex-colleagues would get together in groups at their homes to apply for jobs. But the closure couldn't have happened at a worse time. The last few months of the year are the slowest in the job market, and while some folks would find work in January once the hiring rush came around, many more wouldn't. Many more still haven't. Some left the Bay Area immediately to go home, or went to work in a different industry. Caroline didn't have many commitments in the Bay Area, but she also didn't have time to wait around, so she took whatever job she could get. In the weeks after the closure, she managed to find work, but it wasn't exactly local. She had to move almost 3,000 miles away, to Raleigh, North Carolina.
Obviously, the day of, a lot of people were talking about it. A lot of people in the games industry were reaching out and saying like, hey, if you're, in this department, reach out to us. We have openings, stuff like that. And it was a lot of like, hey, like, let's all go to this person's house today and just like sit around and like pet their dog and apply to jobs and like pretend like our lives aren't on fire for a hot second. I was in a, fortunate relatively position of, not having a huge department to combat with, but like if you were a writer at Telltale, congratulations, you're now fighting with your friends for open jobs. Not only that, but like other studios had layoffs around the same time, people were still looking for work. So if you're looking at something that's not in the Bay Area or an international job or something like that, you're competing with other people who are victims of layoffs. You're competing with people who are wanting to get in the games industry, either from a different industry or as their first job or whatever, the typical job pool. And that was something that I struggled with when I got my job at Limited Run Games, because that happened fairly fast. And I started in November, and I still had friends that didn't have jobs, didn't have health insurance, didn't have anything. And I lost sleep over it. I mean, I go to therapy now, and like, this is what I talk about. I talk about Telltale at therapy. There's plenty of other shit happening in my life that I could talk about, but I talk about Telltale and how terrible it made me feel at the time, and trying to get to some peace with it now, and how do you navigate that?
There are still a lot of people who have found no work whatsoever yet. A lot of people are on contracts or freelancing and are still trying to find additional gigs. There is not a sense that things have evened out or settled yet. A lot of people are still in need, and people have mostly stopped talking about Telltale. I mean, there have been enough other high-profile layoffs since then that we're not the shiny new kid on the block anymore.
I don't know. I think now I have like trust issues in terms of just employment. It's just like, how do you go into games industry job now and think like, I'm totally secure? You know, even if you're at a successful company, you might go through layoffs. It happened recently to a huge profitable company. Sometimes when I think about the future, it's just like a giant question mark to me. Like, how do I feel like I can settle down somewhere? How do I feel like I can buy a house somewhere, or, you know, get married or whatever, when like my whole life could be upended? It's a big thing that I'm trying to kind of move past, is this ability to form bonds with people, because I always feel like, well, like, why even bother if 2 years from now I'm gonna like leave? And I just experienced that, and that hurt so much. But anything I can do to avoid that, you know, like, the human being wants to protect itself. So like, I've experienced this trauma, and now I'm saying like, what can I do to prevent that from happening again? Let's not ever make friends. That makes sense. Good job, brain. You figured it out. It's not even a priority for me anymore. Like making human connections. I'm like, that'll happen, and if it does, that's good. But I'm not going to seek it out, because who knows where I'm going to be in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years, whatever.
The most painful thing to see is just how this keeps kind of happening. Every week it seems like there's a new hashtag to support another group of devs that have just been laid off. How do we allow people to put down roots anywhere?
Right.
You know, I think that's kind of the bigger challenge that the game industry is facing right now.
My personal view, and I was not an executive, I didn't know exactly how the money issues worked. I'd like to think this wasn't inevitable. I'd like to think there was a world in which there was more caution and more careful planning. I'd also like to believe there's a world where these layoffs happened, but we had a safety net prepared for us, either by the company or by a union or by another outside entity, because those types of things do exist often during layoff and closure situations. The fact that we had none of that does make it feel like a particularly bad stroke of luck.
You know, like, so I know that the unionization conversation keeps coming up. Now, I'm in the Directors Guild,
Right.
So that's a union. The Directors Guild doesn't help me find work. When I am employed, it helps me get the benefits of being employed, so that I'm at the same level as everybody else in terms of healthcare and, you know, all these other things. Should the gaming industry unionize, I think that would be great, just to get everybody on an even playing field and to make sure there's no discrepancy with payment and stuff like that and all the benefits. It's not going to help us maintain work. And if a company doesn't have the money to keep employees hired, like, I'm not a corporate apologist, but it's blood from a stone, you know? What are you paying these people with?
Listening to people speak about this studio has been a learning experience for me. In many ways, Telltale was both the best and worst this industry has to offer. A creative hub bursting with talent which treated that talent poorly, squandered so much opportunity, and was ultimately destroyed by short-sighted management. These have been just 4 stories from the 14 years of development at Telltale Games, and hopefully through them you've gained some more insight into the reality of making games, the passion of the people behind them, and the hardship they are sadly willing to endure to make the games you love. The closure of Telltale Games has played a large part in bringing the topics of workers' rights, crunch and unionization back into focus, and while it's very attractive to use this moment to come to some sort of sweeping conclusion about the future of development, I want to be mindful of reducing all these people's work to a single talking point. Paul, Caroline, Emily and Kent didn't need to come forward to speak to noclip, but they wanted to tell us about both the good memories and the bad, so if nothing else it seemed appropriate to let them tell us how they'd like Telltale to be remembered.
What are some of your favorite moments from your tenure at Telltale?
There were so many just talented people at Telltale. Like there was just genius oozing out of almost everybody that worked there. And just like the camaraderie and people like, especially when the episode was good and everybody knew it was good, we all felt like we was a big group of people working together toward a common goal that we all believed in, which I think is how most of Batman felt and how most of the last Walking Dead season felt too. And like and especially when I was like creative director and I got to like run that team and like feeling like we all believed in this thing was like, I'm gonna miss that like crazy. Like I don't know when I'll work with a team that big again, working together to make something so cool.
I think I'll look back on it fondly. I had 2 really great years filled with really great memories there, and although the last, week, month, 2 months, etc., was some of the hardest times of my life, I really, really liked my friends, and that's something that means everything to me.
Are you proud you had, at least you got to be part of that story?
Yeah, I was really happy to be part of it. My favorite thing that I've ever done at Telltale was I suggested something for Wolf 2 that they were gonna do. And now it'll never come to fruition, and that's kind of a pain. But I was really happy that, I was in marketing and they were listening to my ideas because I'm a story fan. Everyone that works at Telltale is a fan of story. I came from television, I know story. So everybody's opinion maybe not valued the same, but everyone had opinions that were valued. That was nice.
So let's transport ourselves 5 years in the future. Like, what do you want people to remember about Telltale?
I want them to remember the games. I want them to remember that we put forward experiences that helped them feel something, that helped them grow, that made them think, that let them make friends with these characters in our world and experience adventures and fights and romances and think about how different people walk through the world in intense circumstances. I hope that our games will age well and people will continue to enjoy playing them. I hope they'll remember that a lot of love and a lot of care went into those projects and that many of us would have kept making those for another decade if we could have.
I think Wolf would have been so shocking for people because it was a complete departure from what everybody expected it to be, and it would have been really cool. The lead writer on that and who became the creative director, Nicole Martinez, she had this amazing vision for it, and now she's off at Crystal Dynamics working on whatever they're doing there, and it was a loss to like see it go away. Yeah, like you watching all of these months and months of work just vanish, disappear. It was heartbreaking.
Yeah, how much work had been done on Stranger Things by the time?
Oh, a lot. Like the approval process alone, just getting the story approved and getting it like to where we needed it to be so that Netflix was good with it, the Duffer Brothers were okay with it, building out the world, like the town was built. It was beautiful too. Like it was really cool looking. And it's sad that outside of the GIFs that leaked onto the internet, people won't see it.
Batman had some passionate fans, and they were cool. The Walking Dead fan base is infinitely huger and more passionate and crazy. They are crazy, and I love it. So anytime we release anything, I immediately go on and look at all the reactions and see people just like losing their minds. And we were actually planning on making a new IP after that I was actually going to get to be a part of, and it was going to be the most game thing we've ever done. So it was like, this is the time to turn the ship around and get Telltale's reputation back. And I felt like creatively we were definitely on our way. It's like I wish the next 3 games had come out because I think they would have been some of the best stuff we would have ever made.